Carolyn Savage and Peter Buckland are leading SCC's first webinar focused on living labs, a topic that was often requested at our last faculty conference and subsequently through answering our two basic questions. So we're particularly pleased to have Carolyn and Peter leading today's discussion. Carolyn will present on the Campus as Lab program at Princeton, which supports faculty, staff, and students from a variety of disciplines in using the campus as a living laboratory to solve sustainability challenges on topics ranging from energy conservation and natural resource management to behavior change. As Campus Lab Manager, Carolyn works at the campus-based intersection of operational, educational, and research activities that result in the advancement of sustainability problem solving. She designs and implements the Campus Lab program to encourage and support the Princeton campus community in testing sustainable solutions engaging all disciplines. Importantly, she has also developed and maintains a 100+ member international best practices network on living labs, and I'm sure we'll hear more about that today. Carolyn previously served as the director of the Institute for Community Sustainability at Indiana State University in Terre Haute, Indiana, where she laid the groundwork, among other things, for an eco-village in the community adjacent to the university. Peter Buckland's presentation will discuss Penn State's initial foray into living labs for sustainability as created through the Penn State Reinvention Fund, and that included the creation of a program evaluation framework that assessed returns on 5 forms of capital for 5 stakeholder groups. He will likely discuss the significant difficulties in evaluating these projects, and he'll provide an evaluative framework for assessing living labs for sustainability, a framework that came about through an extensive mixed methods program evaluation along with suggestions for refining living lab evaluation tools. Peter works on academic and outreach programming at Penn State's Sustainability Institute, and he is affiliate faculty in educational theory and policy. Importantly, he curates the Field Guide to Teaching Sustainability, a great resource. He also coordinates special programs and presentations for sustainability and teaches courses in sustainability education and leadership. His ongoing work is on climate change communication education, sustainability education praxis, and ecofeminist care ethics for teaching sustainability problem posing. At this point, I'm going to change the presenter role over to Carolyn. And hopefully we will see her slides. There it is. And Carolyn, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Ira. I'm really excited to be here today, and especially excited to be talking with Peter, whose work I'd been familiar with for years and just actually bumped into him at this October's HE conference. And since then, it's been really wonderful and just very energizing and a lot of fun to work with him, and I'm looking forward to the conversation today. So without further ado, where we're going, I'm gonna, just as Ira said, kind of give you a snapshot of what a living lab is, why a living lab approach, and walk you through kind of some of the trends we're seeing nationally through the international community of best practices, and then speak really quickly about how you might be able to leverage resources. I'm gonna try to go through that as quickly as possible so we can get to Peter, and then we're both really interested in the conversation at the end of the call. So we'll go right ahead with that. So just to frame the conversation really quickly, you'll hear as we talk about the idea of campus as a living lab, this thought that we're thinking of our campuses as microcosms for these global issues. And that's true. But one thing to kind of help you get in the mindset for this is, so these microcosms are great. And I think the folks who are doing this Campus Lab work it's really easy day to day to kind of think about the discrete projects that you're working on, which are really important. But one thing that's been really wonderful about our community practice is it kind of helps us see the macro of this microcosm. So I'd really encourage you to join this community practice. This slide is also going to appear at the end of the presentation. So if you're scribbling to write things down, don't worry about it, or you can just write down the tinyurl.com/CalDrive. That'll direct you to all the resources that are on this slide. But I'm really interested in how we can kind of go beyond the individual really fantastic projects we're doing on our individual campuses and think about the more global impact that we can have. So with no further ado, what is Campus as a Living Lab? I think this is something that most of you thinking people on this call are probably already doing in some way, shape, or form. I think it's sort of natural for a curiosity to arise academically about some of the things that you see on your own campuses. So the two main themes, I would say, of Campus's Lab or Campus's Living Lab or Campus's Learning Lab, you'll see there are a lot of different terms that are used. Even applied learning for sustainability, we're finding often means a similar thing as what we mean by Campus's Living Lab. I would say the two central themes of these projects or initiatives are that they sit at the nexus of academics and operations, thinking about how we can work across those sectors, usually within our own campus. And two is, again, that they tend to be microcosms for global issues. So what can we do right here in these small, sometimes city-like communities that we can affect that can have an impact globally and can kind of speak beyond our campus's borders. So again, all these terms are used. Some of the folks who are using, like I have a colleague at University of Calgary who prefers the term Learning Lab. They're really focused on the academic component of that. I think often, depending on where these campuses lab initiatives are housed, the scope can change, the focus can change. I think a lot of them are currently living under facilities departments, as ours is. So I'm staff at the university, I don't teach. And so with that, some of them tend to focus more on the operations aspect, but some of them also go beyond the university and their focus is a little bit more community related. And so I'd say that's where the applied learning idea comes in, where the boundaries of campus aren't quite so relevant. On our campus, they happen to be, but depending on where you are, again, this can change. And a really great example of a program that transcends that campus boundary is the Seeds Program out of University of British Columbia. And I'll talk briefly about them in just a little bit. So we asked about a year ago, I did a survey, a couple of surveys through a group of about 900 sustainability practitioners. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Green Schools listserv, but it's a best practice network of about 900 sustainability practitioners across the nation and internationally. Just asking, does your campus do Campus's Lab? How do you define it? What does this look like where you are? It got about 70 responses, which we thought was pretty good. At the time we did the survey last year, only about half of the people that we surveyed had a definition for what this meant. Most of them they kind of know what they want to do, but they might not have codified it in a succinct sentence. And some of them, interestingly, even were doing Campus's Lab, but not necessarily in a sustainability focused way. They might be using their Campus's Lab for other issues. And again, this was a question I asked to sustainability practitioners. So that was interesting. You can kind of see some of the common themes emerging here. One other thing that I thought was interesting from the survey is we also asked whether these campuses had a role like mine, where you have somebody full-time or close to full-time engaged in coordinating Campus's Lab programs and activities and a culture. And I'm sorry that yes and no colors are confusing between these two graphs, but the one thing I wanted to illustrate here is that not only do most of them not, most of them are falling into this red, about 60% saying, no, we don't have a staff person focused on this. A small fraction are saying, yes, they do. And then we also have like 20% of the responses are everything in the middle. People trying to define, well, we have somebody that's like half of one person and 3/4 of another, and that kind of thing. So if you don't have somebody on your campus who's doing this work full time, you're certainly not alone, and that doesn't limit you in where you can go with Campus's Lab. So this is just a map of where all of the respondents were located. I was really surprised. We got a great showing from Canada, obviously some clustering on the east and west coast, but some pretty significant showing in the south of the US as well. And if you're looking at these dots and wondering where exactly these are, debating the geography, that's because I painstakingly placed each dot by hand, so in just an attempt to illustrate this quickly, so as do not criticize my geography skills too much. So why do campuses lab if it isn't already something that speaks to you? I think there are a lot of reasons. Primarily among them is student learning. We find that this idea of applied learning, especially at a university like Princeton that tends to be very theoretical, this really resonates with students. Sometimes we'll have projects where the turnaround is so quick that a student will be able to recommend a change to campus sustainability policy in the fall semester, and in the spring semester we enact it, and they actually get to see the difference that their idea and their research made. That's really huge, especially if you're a university that's thinking at all about alumni engagement and after they graduate. The idea that students are going to be coming back 5-10 years from now and seeing the impact they made on campus, or seeing sustainability trends going in a positive direction is really powerful as a student, and also increases their learning and ability to deal with messy real world data, which is always fun, coaching them through that process. A lot of them find it much more rewarding than just working through a generic economics problem set when they actually get to play around in campus. Another good reason to do Campuses Lab is going beyond kind of transactional sustainability. It's obviously important to do things like Earth Day and events and kind of create that culture in these intangible ways. But the Campuses Lab research and programs give your campus something really tangible, something really applied. Often, as the goal is research, they're really about getting to a result. And that can be easier to capture than some of the sustainability initiatives that I think we've been used to doing for the past 10 years. Again, not to say that those are wrong or we shouldn't be doing them, but it's sort of like the 2.0. How do we do this? How do we analyze our own sustainability activity and make sure that the sustainability we're putting out there is the best possible solution for our campus? And I know Peter will talk much more about this when we turn it over to him. And then another point I would bring up is that the relationship building process, I would say that's most of what I do with my time. As somebody who's the full-time Campuses Lab manager at Princeton, is just going back and forth between the academic community and the operational community, translating the different languages for each group, doing some risk mitigation and risk management between them, doing some relationship building internally among our own facilities community here at Princeton, as I'm part of that community, and then building relationships with some of the administration who can get really excited by these ideas. I would say that's a huge reason to do Campuses Lab. It's been well worth the time. We're seeing a lot of investment in sustainability and a lot of visibility as a result of doing some of these programs. There are a lot of other reasons to do Campuses Lab as well. I just picked a couple of my favorites. On our campus, we're also seeing the ability to connect with other fields. So I mentioned earlier that not all campuses are necessarily doing Campuses Lab just in sustainability, and we're actually seeing a center emerge on Princeton's campus called the Kahneman Treisman Center for Behavioral Psychology, I believe. And they're interested in using Campuses Lab for behavioral research as well. How do we get people to change behavior? Often intersects with sustainability, right? That's how we change the conversation. What is it that we're actually doing that can generate behavior change? So we can work with them a lot, but they also have their own separate non-sustainability behavioral Campuses Lab ideas, and technology as well. Some of our engineering folks and folks who are interested in just technology, they want to do research on Campuses Lab, sometimes intersects with sustainability and sometimes not. And then another reason I might throw in there is saving money. Some of the Campuses Lab projects we've seen and other campuses have seen are very effective at analyzing which would be the best solution for reducing your campus's carbon footprint while saving money. Just a couple of snapshots from around the continent, around North America at least. We're finding through the community practice that we all have a lot to teach each other. We definitely have our own way of doing Campuses Lab at Princeton, but it's certainly not the only way or necessarily a one size fits all approach or necessarily even the best way. We're all learning. It's very iterative. One thing we learned really early on when we started this community practice, so this is a picture from Campuses Lab at Princeton University. We have a Princeton vertical farming project, which is one of our flagship programs right now. We just have a ton of students interested in food. We had a researcher who was interested in whether or not you could grow crops indoors more economically than taking up lots of agricultural land space. So we have a ton of students who are interested in researching that and producing very high quality research, which is very exciting. One other thing that we found is that this is a picture of California State University's San Luis Obispo's solar field, which I believe this is a photo of it being in construction. So the California State University system actually has a really robust program for their whole 23 university network, which is really great. So that's not something that we're doing at Princeton. We're just doing it on our own here. But the ability to tap into a regional network and promote it through, they have an RFP program where schools can apply for some amount of money. I want to say it's up to $20,000 to do Campuses Lab programs. And those are supported by the Chancellor's Office of the California State University system. So it's been a really great way of encouraging this as a culture across their system and across their state. I had the privilege to attend the California Higher Education Sustainability Conference in July this year, and just the understanding among schools about what this means and why we do it, and that we're all kind of on the same page with wanting to do Campuses Lab was really transformative, and it helps transform the conversation as far as learning about Campuses Lab goes and being more effective goes. This is a photo of a project at Central New Mexico Community College. It's been really interesting to engage with the community colleges, especially since they'll typically have a different idea of what it means to do research in that setting as compared to a research university like Princeton. It tends to be very practical and very applied. And Central New Mexico University, one thing we learned from them was that their Campuses Lab folks had been really effective at integrating this idea of Campuses Lab into RFPs for new buildings or for new construction or for new projects that campus facilities might be doing, which was great because they don't have full-time Campuses Lab staff, and they needed to generate funding to do this or resources to do this. And they found that by including a requirement in some of their RFPs that the folks who are constructing a building will include students in the process and will work to integrate the construction process into curriculum with faculty member was really effective. So I chose this shot not because it has a lot of great cars in the parking lot, but one of the ways they chose to integrate the construction of this particular building was through a GIS class and through using aerial photography of this project as it was being constructed and being able to integrate that right into some courses. And then finally, this is a picture from University of British Columbia. Their Seeds program is probably one of the oldest examples of Campuses Lab. It's been going for 20 years. It's really interesting to find this great example, longstanding example based in Canada. And so this is a project that they called Finding Home in Unexpected Places. So you'll see there are some pictures of birdhouses that students constructed out of sustainable materials. And it was a way of telling stories about refugees and where is home, and being able to engage the humanities in this research, which is interesting. I think this is an area where we have room to grow at Princeton, is how do we engage different disciplines, not necessarily the sciences and the same folks you would expect. Obviously, they're important too, but how do we branch out? And the UBC Seeds Program is doing a really excellent job of that. And there are just endless other things that we have to learn from each other. One of the things that was a takeaway for us really early on was somebody asked a question to our community of practice about non-disclosure agreements. So a lot of times we're working with campus data, some of which can be sensitive for a variety of reasons. And somebody asked the group, hey, what are you guys doing to secure that data and make sure that, if a student's using it, it doesn't get out after that? And we said, I don't know. So thanks to this group asking some intelligent questions at our campus, we've been able to start a process that gives our data more security, which has been great because then standards are kind of universal. There's not, well, this person got access to data and I didn't. It's kind of streamlined, and there's more security for the university and able to go to different stakeholders and say, hey, we have good reasons to believe that your data is going to be protected if we share it for this research purpose. So this is just how the Campuses Lab program is structured at Princeton. I think you just kind of play to your strengths wherever you go, right? So at Princeton, all graduating seniors have to do something called the senior thesis, which is basically master's thesis quality work. They have to produce, they have the whole year to do it. And juniors have to do similar, smaller scale projects, one in their fall semester and one in their spring semester. So we have a lot of independent student research going on anyway. And through the Campuses Lab program, we've been able to capitalize on that need to do investigative research and to help some students do this applied Campuses Lab research as part of their independent work that's required, which has been really great and just a great way to meaningfully engage students in individual projects that are of interest to them. We've also been able to do this through coursework. A lot of faculty who are interested in maybe redesigning a portion of their courses to include a Campuses Lab activity. We're working with a professor, civil engineering professor, who was teaching a lab about concrete. She reformed it into a lab about sustainable concrete. So we're using different materials and testing some little cylinders that her class produced by leaving them out in our campus garden and seeing what happens to them over time. So is this sustainable concrete maybe a material that we might want to use in some campus buildings as those are constructed? And then faculty research. We have a lot of faculty that are independently interested in researching some of these things. So capitalizing on that and helping link them to resources that helps them pursue the projects that are important to them. And I think this can be important when faculty want to pursue something that's maybe related to their field, but isn't maybe quite their main focus. So how do you support faculty maybe trying to straddle silos a little bit is something that we've been working on. Obviously funding always helps, but kind of what are some of the other incentives we can provide, or how can we help reduce barriers as a focus of our program. So on our campus, when I came in about a year ago, our focus for Campuses Lab was about how can we take advantage of the wonderful academic community at Princeton and engage them in meeting some of our operational sustainability goals. That was the conversation about a year ago. And so since I've been here, we've made, I'd say, a slight shift away from that to kind of more the other arrow, the other direction. And now we think about Campuses Lab as how can we, as facilities members, as folks who work on Princeton's operations, how can we be a resource for our really fantastic academic community and help them accomplish their research goals, by the way, while meeting our sustainability goals along the way. Really quickly on leveraging resources, I think it's easy to say, well, sure, you're Princeton, you have lots of resources, and that's true. Our faculty do tend to expect a lot more than at other universities where I've worked. And one thing I found is that doing effective Campuses Lab programs, I'll be curious to know what Peter thinks about this, but in my experience, it's really not about having a monetary resource or having this kind of resource or that resource. It's about using the resources that you have effectively. So one story I like to tell, this is a picture of the community garden at Indiana State University. This is on Indiana State University's campus. This is my previous employer. So you can see that what they have in Indiana is a whole heck of a lot of land. This is just a very small portion of the land that the university owns. Terre Haute is a Rust Belt town. So they saw a lot of property vacancies around the 1970s or so when people started to leave for job opportunities elsewhere. And the university started buying up these parcels of land as they were abandoned so they could quality control the area surrounding the university for student safety and a lot of other reasons. And so they owned this land and didn't really have much of a plan for it. So we kind of came in and said, hey, could we set up a research test plot here? Or, hey, we actually have a brownfield site on our campus. Can we do some testing on that and maybe make that part of a master's thesis? So I would encourage you to think not about what resources you don't have, but what resources you do have, and get creative with those resources. So I don't need to necessarily spend a lot of time going through each one of these, but I mentioned, for example, the RFP process that Central New Mexico Community College went through and integrating Campuses Lab there. Others have done things like thinking about where you have graduate students who might have some spare time and are interested in, kind of maybe straddling that silo, interested in getting experience in something else other than what their main focus is. How can you capitalize on that? Who else at your university is interested in doing these kinds of things or the project you're interested in? Can you do a budget share? Can you, go in to get together on something or write a grant together? Innovation funds is another area I'd recommend. Our university offers funding for innovative projects, and other universities do this as well. So if you're looking for funds specifically, your funding opportunity might not necessarily come with the name sustainability on it, but because this idea of Campuses Lab is pretty innovative, I'd encourage you to look for opportunities that maybe speak about creativity or applied research or innovation or that kind of thing, and maybe breaking a little bit outside of the sustainability realm. So I think I can close for there because I'm a little bit over my time, and we'll switch over to Peter, but thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Carolyn, and thank you so much, Ira, for getting us together. I really appreciate, wow, why did that happen? I really appreciate the opportunity and to be here. So you will hear some things that will resonate quite a bit with what Carolyn just talked about, that include student learning, sustainability outcomes and results, stakeholder management and engagement, as well as transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary work. I think you'll also see that there is a blending of the sciences. There's also humanities, there's operations, there's research. There are a number of things that you're going to see because the way that we had structured our program was really quite open. I want to just give you a little bit of background about Penn State because I think the context is really, really important. And actually, I'd say that Caroline's last comment about resources is indicative of that. It is about the resources that you have that include the people and the place. So it's about you and your place. It's about your community, the culture of your university and its place, and the way it's nested into the much larger systems that we're a part of. But in some sense, it ultimately will come down to the community with whom you can work and your imagination and drive. So Penn State was founded by the Morrill Act as a land-grant institution in 1862 and signed into being by Abraham Lincoln. And this is an image of the fresco that is in our old main building. And there you can see Abe Lincoln with a young farmer. And the university was founded to serve the engineering and agricultural professions and has since come to be a comprehensive university, a Research One university. We have 93,000 students across 23 Commonwealth campuses and a world campus. We have an operating budget of about $5.5 billion, which is larger than the budgets of 40 countries. So it is a really, really big place. But at its heart, from its founding, it has a sustainability component through its service to the people and our commonwealth within it. And we had a sustainability strategic plan that was done in the early 2010s that codified what sustainability ought to be. And we defined it as the simultaneous pursuit of human health and happiness, economic well-being, and environmental quality for current and future generations. So it is a kind of typical triple bottom line plus Brundtland. But for myself, I'm really happy that it includes happiness. I think that's a really wonderful thing. And so things have kind of flowed from that understanding. And one of the early ideas in the formation of the sustainability strategic plan was that the living lab ought to be one of the ways that we realize sustainability at Penn State. So before I get to the projects that have happened at Penn State, I just want to give you a little bit of background about the sort of thought that went into it and the definition of living laboratory that we used. And this was created by David Riley, Lisa Brown, Denise Wardrop, with input from some others at Penn State. But they had done work with folks at Portland State University and actually the New Mexico University that Caroline just referred to really dive into what living labs ought to be. And so this is the definition, and I'm going to read it, that we used in framing the projects, framing the Reinvention Fund. So a living laboratory is an ecosystem for learning that enables the unique features of our communities, facilities, campus grounds, and regional neighborhoods to serve as test beds for the development of innovation solutions to real challenges. Through project-based teaching, research, and applied work, we will combine our talents across the functions of the university and within our community to explore, experiment, and evaluate actionable solutions. And so I think that you can probably hear some of those different versions of campus as lab or applied learning that Caroline referred to earlier. And I like to show this picture because these mutualistic relationships are really what we're looking for. We're looking for these perhaps counterintuitive relationships between people who may work in operations or in the community, and then faculty or staff or students or some combination of all of those in order to create something that can realize sustainability in an often solution or certainly educationally oriented way. So the Reinvention Fund was created in 2014, and it was our way of trying to kickstart an innovative white space to transform Penn State into a living lab. So it connected students, faculty, and staff to one another, to the broader community, and also to support ecosystems in which we live. We did so to foster learning, experimentation, and capacity building for sustainability. $876,000 were set aside, and we had an RFP process that took pre-proposals and then proposals, and then evaluated those proposals and went through a selection process where we had 33 projects that came out on the other side with funding in the range from $550 to $75,000. So students, faculty, staff, and community members carried out the Reinvention Fund in Sierra Leone, South Africa, Las Vegas, University Park, which is our main campus, as well as communities in at least 16 Pennsylvania counties. There were students from over 40 academic tracks and numerous clubs, faculty from 35 different disciplines and 25 centers and institutes, and staff from 25 different functional areas of the university. And so, and all of these, they also collaborated with between 80 and 100 civic, government, business, nonprofit, and other university partners in the United States and abroad. So it really was a very far-reaching program. And I was hired to evaluate what happened from the Reinvention Fund, which, as you can imagine, these 33 projects happening all over the state and in other parts of the world presented quite a challenge. But I was asked to evaluate it using really this first question. And the initial statement of the question was, what were the returns on investment, or what are the returns on investment? And as you can imagine, being the sustainability folks that we are, we said, well, it can't just be about money, because there are these other things at work. These projects are so different, and I'll talk about some of them. They're so different that evaluating their returns and focusing on money will do an incredible disservice to student learning, the outcomes and results, the stakeholders who are involved, and so on. So I pretty quickly expanded the notion of return to include these 5 forms of capital: human, social, produced, financial, and natural. And I'll talk a bit about that. We also wanted to know what we could learn about living labs through assessing the Reinvention Fund project. So is the living lab an actionable concept? And really importantly, what made a successful project? And so I'll be focusing more on numbers 1 and 3 here. And I used Maxwell's model for qualitative research design as my basic way of creating my research design. So capital, the human capital, we wanted to know what skills and knowledge had developed over the course of creating and implementing these projects. We wanted to see what sort of trust and relationships were built up or were newly formed. We wanted to see what sort of produced capital, the constructed things, including projects that may have happened in like stream bank restoration, riparian buffer, things of that nature. Also financial returns, so were people finding grants, were they saving money, avoided costs, and then also natural assets and services. Was there some way that we would have good reason to believe that there was some sort of ecosystem service return? Obviously, when you have 32 projects, you cannot dive into the weeds on all 32 of them. But I did my best, and I can talk maybe a little bit during questions about how I tried to do that a little bit more. In terms of stakeholders, we wanted to think about stakeholders not from the point of view of the investor, but in terms really of a much more complete stakeholder engagement. So who was being served? So the customer, who were the customers? Who were the co-creators and what were they getting back from the projects? The earth, nature as a stakeholder. Ooh, what just happened? Sorry about that. Community and also investors. In terms of what made a successful project, we had to define what success meant. And it was approximately meeting the project's stated goals in a timely fashion and in ways that generated multiple capital returns for multiple stakeholders. So during the RFPs, during the proposal vetting process, the projects had stated goals, and so in my evaluations, what did I see happening to be able to say, yeah, that was a successful project? And obviously, even to get funding for the project, it had to align with our concept of sustainability. So I'm going to come back to these, but these are the 6 characteristics of successful projects, and it's really about the teams, that they had a vision of sustainability, that they were committed to education, that they were built on an existing initiative, that they broadened coalitions so that development of trust and relationships was really, really integral, that they had a committed champion or maybe set of champions, but someone who was leading and could drive things forward. And they were structured and organized. They knew how to use their time, and they knew how to focus and work in the systems around them. So I'm going to give you a few examples here. So for sustainability vision, this project, Biological Controls for Greenhouse Pest Management, was headed up by that gentleman there, Scott DiLoretto, and he has been working in Penn State University Park's greenhouses for quite a few years, and he is the College of Agriculture's greenhouse manager. And he realized that they were using a lot of pesticides in the greenhouses, and that created really unwanted human health impacts and downstream environmental impacts. So he devised a program that would use integrated pest management, primarily with mites and certain forms of parasitic flies and wasps to control pests within the greenhouse. And the results were that, depending on the greenhouse space, he was able to reduce pesticide use 60 to 100% in different locations. His vision was very focused, but it had broad impacts that I'm sure many of you can understand from your own experiences. It also created a lot of educational opportunities, which I can talk about later. You can actually watch a video that was created by WPSU on this, and that link is at the bottom. It will be made available to you later when the slides are made available to you. So educational commitment. This was I think a really remarkable project done by two faculty in our College of Arts and Architecture in the School of Visual Arts, Kat Parazek and mostly Steve Rubin. And what they did is they took students out into the shale gas fields of Pennsylvania and in communities around them to photograph the changes in Pennsylvania communities and landscapes from the rise of hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling and the gas boom that's happened. And so they were committed to a really deep immersive experience for their own students, but because it was documentary photography, they created galleries that they put in around campus and in the State College community. That's the town that's right next to us. So we have University Park and State College. People have, I guess, rather boring imaginations for naming things, but such as it is. So these different galleries were done at the same time as a major exhibition called the Marcellus Shale Documentary Project that actually featured some of Steve Rubin's work. And what they were able to do is become part of a much larger conversation through photography of the impacts of shale gas development on Pennsylvania communities. And I can say, having been to multiple of these events, the conversations were remarkable, and they included people with no idea about this when they came in to very strong opinions. And then students, faculty, staff, community members all had really engaged conversations in it that set the stage for the coming years Penn State Reads book, which was The Boom by Russell Gold. So that educational commitment was really quite incredible. Now, an existing initiative that's existed at Penn State for decades is called the Living Filter. We take processed wastewater from our wastewater treatment plant and pipe it more or less northwest of campus to some spray fields, some of which are agricultural fields and others are in a forest. A student, graduate student named Jake, conducted a series of tests determining how much nitrate was taken out of the wastewater post-treatment through the living filter itself, and he did this at different sites. Now, the cores that he took are now available for testing for other purposes in the College of Earth and Mineral Sciences in the Department of Geosciences. And this project was started decades ago by a professor in geosciences named Dick Parazek. And so Jake was able to build on an existing initiative in a really meaningful way that serves the purposes of sustainability for the university. He has gotten publications out of this. It was in his thesis. He is now a doctoral student at the University of Maryland. But that existing initiative and the infrastructure, human and built, that was already there really enabled his success. He didn't have to make up a huge amount. And he also provided information back to that system that has been very helpful. So committed champions. This is one of my favorite stories. So we provided about $7,500 to the student group who was going to the National Collegiate Wind Energy Competition, the American Wind Energy Society competition. So these students had to put together a small-scale wind turbine and develop a business and communication plan for it. So it transcended just wind turbine technology and made it into a thing that people could use out in the field, and they had to be able to communicate why it was good, necessary, and sell it. Brian, who is at the bottom left of the screen, was a PhD student in aerospace engineering who went on to get a job at Sikorsky, in part because of his commitment to this initiative. Now, they were the winners of the 2014 competition. Penn State also won the 2016 competition. But one of the reasons that they won is because, well, when Brian and the team arrived in Las Vegas, they opened up their boxes, and 2 of the blades of their turbine were broken. And Brian immediately set about finding how they could get turbine blades printed, and found a 3D printing shop in Southern California, contacted them, sent them the specs, and was able to have that printed in about 12 hours. He drove there in the middle of the night, got it, came back in time for them to assemble the turbine and have it ready for the second test, which was quite successful. But that kind of commitment, now Brian is a kind of outlier who was faced with an incredible challenge, but there were other similarly committed, though not as tested, champions for some of the other Reinvention Fund projects. But I really love sharing his story because it saved his team. Finally, structure and organization. So we had a people, plants, and pollinators project. This was put together by graduate students, mostly in the College of Agriculture, maybe entirely in the College of Agriculture. And they wanted to design a pollinator garden, and you can see the schematic on the left, that would go over to our Sustainability Experience Center. And this group really put things together so that they would accomplish their goals in a very timely fashion. And that organization, which required them organizing themselves, and then also really knowing what would bloom when and how, and what pollinators it would support, really took a lot of working and shared teaching, which would go back to the first thing that I talked about, educational commitment. But they also really worked effectively with the Penn State Master Gardeners and other faculty and the staff of our Office of Physical Plant. So I should say what made unsuccessful projects, and it is sort of the inverse or converse of some of these things. So either folks didn't have a strong sustainability vision that they were committed to, they didn't commit themselves to a real educational commitment, they didn't integrate with existing initiatives, it was too outside of the scope, they damaged coalitions or damaged relationships either in the community or within the university itself. They didn't have a committed or they had a weak champion who did not have access to the university in an effective way, or they lacked structure or organization. Now, none of this is rocket science, but I do think it bears saying. And looking at the time, I'm not going to share an example right now, but I would be happy to share during questions. So I just want to come back to what made successful projects. And it is a strong sustainability vision that integrated the 3 pillars of sustainability, a strong educational commitment that had multiple opportunities for deep and broad learning. They built on existing initiatives, so none of these that were really successful came from scratch. They broadened coalitions, so they both strengthened existing relationships, and they broaden relationships, which made them transdisciplinary, not just interdisciplinary, but transdisciplinary. And that Marcellus Shale example is really good, because those faculty worked with folks from the Marcellus Center for Outreach and Research, which is so totally different. So bringing the photographer to the geoscientists and the engineers. They had committed champions, so those people who would really step in, make sure they got things done, and then finally they were structured and organized. They used their time effectively and organized themselves so that their champion and themselves could get things done. So that is all for me. I'll switch it over to Caroline so that she can do a final statement, and then I think we'll take questions.
That was great. Can that be my final statement?
Yeah, sure. Sure, why not? So yeah, if there are questions that folks would like to ask, we are all ears. I also just want to say again, thank you, Caroline. Thank you so much, Ira, for hosting us. I think that there's so much interested in this. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to all of your questions.
Yes, thank you both. Two excellent presentations. For those like myself who don't have much of a background in living labs, it was an extraordinary introduction and sophisticated enough on in both halves for those who have been working with living labs to gain a further appreciation of how to incorporate this into the academic side, to understand how to identify resources, and finally the monitoring and evaluation piece. The way we do SCC webinars is, as I've been noting throughout in the chat box, to please place your questions and comments in the chat box, and I'll tee them up for both Carolyn and Peter. And I see that some are starting to come in now. There were several earlier, Carolyn, for you, and why don't I give you a cluster of questions and comments, and you can respond how you like.
Sounds great.
I guess they fell into two main categories, mostly one set mostly revolving around the slide that identified three pathways. I think you're familiar with what I'm referring to, where one was independent study, the second was coursework, and then there was a third one. The question was specific to looking for more examples of how independent student research and coursework would arise and how it would be evaluated. The other group of questions and comments went to the placement of your program at the interface of operations and academics. And to distill it down, I guess the question is, who do you report to, and how does that affect resources? So I'll stop there for now.
Those are great questions. Thank you. So to the question about independent coursework, I put that up there. So there's independent coursework, faculty, research interest, and independent student research, coursework, and faculty research. Independent coursework is, I think, one of those things where it's a resource that Princeton has, and we decided to use it. So this is, again, Princeton students at their senior year level have to be producing this outside of the classroom, meaning not facilitated through a particular course, their own unique individual research projects. All of them have to do this. So since they're doing this anyway, a lot of them are doing, theories, or they're, researching, doing, I don't know, less applied, much more theoretical research. And so we've been able to use that framework where, hey, you have to do this research to graduate anyway. Why don't you do something meaningful that you can see the results of when you come back to campus for your 20-year class reunion? So in terms of how to do that, students are interested. So they come to us. We certainly have our own little, promotions package where we, try to get into different research resources for students and kind of that integration piece that Peter was talking about. So we have a office for undergraduate research that we work very closely with and trying to promote the opportunities that we have, some of which can include funding for students if they want to, do maybe a construction project or do some travel as a result of their applied project. But so that independent research framework is already set up by being at Princeton, and we're just kind of capitalizing on it, which is great. I think in other universities that might look completely differently. You might have a student do an independent study, for example. We just have the benefit that that kind of structure is embedded throughout our university, which is great. And if that doesn't answer your question, let me know. My email is up there, thanks to, I think, Peter, who's throwing this up on the slide. And so the reporting structure question, which is always an important one. So I am in the Office of Sustainability at Princeton University, which sits in our office, in our Department of Facilities Management. So very much on the operations end. We're fortunate that recently, just this year, we received a new executive director for facilities at Princeton, and that person is Q Wang, who is on the board for ASHE, the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education. So we're very fortunate to have him at the helm of facilities, and he's helped to drive a lot of this energy. But I will say also that a lot of it had been building long before I got here. The Campuses Lab idea was starting to become pretty embedded in some key places by Shauna Weber, our office's director. So it's kind of all about laying the groundwork. But I guess the direct answer to your question is Office of Sustainability under facilities, so operations.
Very good. I'm going to throw two more questions out there, and you both can answer, but let's take Peter first and then come back to you, Carolyn. The first question, how do you deal with projects that require ongoing operational funds? And the example given is the pollinator garden might require more maintenance than traditional campus landscaping. And another question that has come in is, how do you see the best way for bridge building between academics and operations staff? Is it workshops, lunch and learn, one-on-one? Any thoughts on those?
Yeah, sure. Let me just make sure I have these both right. So the projects that require ongoing operational funds, like the pollinator project, and some there were some others. For example, we have an electric vehicle charging station that is powered by solar PV. And we funded with the Reinvention Fund, about a third of that project. And there are some others. What's important is that during the creation of the proposal, the team that will be on that proposal would, in those cases, it had to include the Office of Physical Plant as a primary stakeholder or a supporting voice. So for the photovoltaic electric vehicle charging station, that idea was put forward and championed by a continuous commissioning engineer in the Office of Physical Plant, who then developed some educational components around it and got feedback from faculty in architectural engineering and energy mineral engineering as well. So Physical Plant was actually the real kind of owner of that project. And so they were saying, we'll maintain this, we want it. Now, the pollinator garden is at the Sustainability Experience Center, and is attached to the community garden at Penn State University Park, which has several dozen community garden plots in it. The community garden club's president was part of the what was part of the co-creative team for the pollinator garden, and they had an established relationship with the maintenance staff of the university, as well as landscaping staff for the Office of Physical Plant. So they had an in, but then they already had basically the maintenance possibility there because of its attachment to the community garden club. There were also, there are faculty in the College of Agriculture who use that pollinator garden now for teaching purposes. So there's that bridge building, which is part of the second question, came about because of common interest. And I would say that, you know, for some folks, you know, some of our architectural engineering faculty, the energy and mineral engineering, which is where some folks from like our solar researchers are located, they were themselves really interested in making that relationship happen. The RFP made it, sort of kicked it off. And so people through the pre-proposal and proposal process were able to come together and had facilitated, hey, everybody, let's get together interactions where that could happen. Like most universities, our physical plant or facilities folks and our academics are incredibly severed. And so it can be hard for things to work out just because of people's schedules. And then the bigger kind of meta or structural scheduling of the way that the year works. Semesters work great for academics. They work terribly for OPP. So there has to be a kind of brokering and facilitation of that if there isn't just passion and will.
Thanks, Peter. Great. If we have, Carolyn, did you want to take a shot at either of those?
I can just
there's another question for you specifically.
Yeah, just really quick. We don't actually support much with our funding that kind of is an ongoing need. If there's something that's a campus operational goal, we find a way to support that on the facilities end that's kind of beyond the campus's lab. The campus's lab funding support that we do give is more about pilot projects, because the idea is that if we are acting as a microcosm for sustainability through campus's lab, these projects should sustain themselves at a certain point or find a way to do that. And so we've had a couple of student projects that have been sort of entrepreneurial and they need seed funding for like a prototype or something, but then they develop a business model, or like the vertical farm, you know, also working in a business model, that kind of thing, or some other way to sustain its own support. And then to the bridges question, how do you build bridges between academics and operations? What I've seen in the past year that I've been here is that there's a lot of work that gets just done with your early adopters to this. So by the time I came in, our campus's lab program was still sort of new, but we had a couple of folks that have been doing this out of their own curiosity and interest for a long time. And it was kind of those early folks and their ability to build relationships. And it's like, okay, well that energy guy is okay in facilities. So maybe, you know, this guy who works on stormwater is also all right too. And just kind of really slowly through these individual relationships and collaborations, just building that trust. We recently had a meeting to kind of connect some of our operations folks and academics folks around a potential grant opportunity. And it was like a litmus test of how well that was working, because we had to kick people out of the room. They were staying out half an hour after talking just about great ideas that they were having. And I don't think that conversation would have been possible a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, just that they're organically wanting to reach out and talk to each other. So I think it's a lot about those individual folks who are willing to step out and nurturing them and encouraging them and doing everything you can to facilitate those relationships happening.
This last question, Carolyn, I think is just a quick off the top of the head answer. Campus's lab to promote student learning seems intuitive, but for those who are newbies, can you point to a key publication or two that documents student learning outcomes using campus as learning lab?
Yes, I can point to several. So the slide that Peter has up on the screen right now, go to that tinyurl.com/CalDrive. There's a README file in there that will kind of orient you. There's a really fantastic publication put out by Katja Brundiers and Fletcher Bedouin that was published, I think, about this time last year. That's in the drive. There's another really great one from the Seeds Program through British Columbia. I'd highly recommend both of those. But even more than that, if you're just starting out, I'd really encourage you to join the community practice. Just listen in on whichever calls you're able to. We're not like taking roll call. Anybody is welcome whenever it fits their schedule, because there are a whole host of folks that know a lot more about this than I do, and we're finding that we're all a lot stronger when we share our knowledge. I learned that my colleague Rochelle Haddock from University of Calgary is on the call. She is the co-founder of this community of practice, and we're just constantly amazed by how much we learn by others. And even though we each have our own Campus Lab programs, some of the folks that maybe don't have full-time staff are really doing a huge amount to lead the way. And so we're getting new folks joining every month, and we'd really love to have you participate.
Well, this was great, Carolyn and Peter. And from the Sustainability Curriculum Consortium perspective, we will continue from time to time to showcase learning lab issues, and we hope that we will be able to schedule your return. Also, let's talk about having a session on living labs at the SCC faculty conference in the late spring. More details on that, as I said at the outset, to come soon. Also, as I've posted in the chat box, the recording of this webinar will be posted by the end of the week. And for those who missed the opening spiel about the Sustainability Curriculum Consortium, I'll just simply say, as we finalize our programming for the spring, we really want to know your biggest challenges and your greatest needs, so we can address your specific needs. If you want to suggest topics or offer your own expertise to lead a webinar or a cohort, please, by all means, be in touch. And you can reach us. All the information is on the website, curriculumforsustainability.org. With that, I'm going to once again thank Peter and Carolyn. Thank you all for joining us, and especially those who've stayed with us to the end here. And we will see you next time. Thank you.